Good evening, everyone. Welcome you all to this launch of report session. In this session, we'll be looking at our findings on the study which we have done on the affordable e-mobility options for low and middle income countries. So, where we have assessed used EV imports and ICE to EV retrofitting as different options. Uh, so, I'll request Ms. Anika to uh, give a welcoming remarks on for this session. She is uh, Program Management Officer at Sustainable Mobility Unit in UNEP. Anika, over to you.
Yes, thanks very much. Hello, everyone. Warm welcome from UNEP side. Many thanks to pManifold for organizing this webinar. Just brief as a background, as UNEP, we're right now supporting over 60 countries globally with the transition to electric mobility. And of course, often the main question that comes up is the high upfront cost differential of new electric vehicles versus existing ICE vehicles. And therefore, we decided to conduct a study to look what are sort of more affordable e-mobility options for low and middle income countries to adopt. And then two topics came up, of course, the one of youth electric vehicles. We know in many regions in the world, for example, right now where I'm based in Kenya, over 90% of vehicles are used vehicles imported. And then what would be the impact of these vehicles would all be electric. And there are, of course, different requirements in terms of, the battery lifetime and others. So that's why we decided to look at that. And the other option is retrofitting. So often the question comes up, can I convert my existing vehicle if it still, has a valid lifespan into electric? And while on the used EV import side, we look mainly at cars. For the retrofitting part, we looked at two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and four-wheelers, and to see sort of what are possibilities to retrofit existing ones, and therefore contributing also to the circular economy. So I'm very grateful that we work with pManifold. We received funding from the Climate Works Foundation to conduct this study. And with that, I'm also happy we'll have some panelists on the ground working on the topic. And with that, I'll hand over back to Akshay from pManifold to run us briefly through the report. And we'll share the link to the report for all of you to have a look at it during this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anika, for this introducing our work. I'll now request Mr. Rahul Bhatia, who is Chairman and Managing Director at pManifold, to walk us through the key findings of the report. Over to you.
Thank you, Akshay. Thank you, Anika. Welcome to my fellow panelists, John and Dr. Srini. As Anika already laid down, the focus of this study, we are looking like how used electric vehicles and retrofitting can help low medium income countries to accelerate their EV transition journey. Why LMICs are important? Like of the 8.2 billion population, they support some 80% of populations. In vehicle stock, they are almost doing some 48% to 50% of the vehicle stock lies in the LMICs. Their emissions, if you will see, is like almost same, 50% road emissions coming from LMICs. And if you see this graph with projections till 2050, LMICs will grow their emissions to almost 2/3 of the road emissions. So I think this stark difference and contribution that comes from LMICs makes it very important that we work upon expediting their EV journey, given their constraints of development and economics for transitioning to EVs. Just looking into some numbers like where LMIC stands in terms of new car sales versus used car sales. So if you are looking into annual results like the world at global level, we are having some 57 million cars newly getting registered year on year. and LMIC shares, if that in this yellow you see, is around 17%, right? So new car sales, LMIC contribution is small, 17%. But if you now look at a world level, like how much are the used cars that are getting traded, and within that, if you start focusing upon like not intra-country trade, but exports of the used cars, then that number is high. That is 3.1 million cars are getting exported, right? Primarily from major economies. And out of that, if you see the LMIC shares, that's a very high percentage of 80%, right? So that connects to the point that Anika was saying, like LMICs by their value and economic value, there is a high used EV imports in those countries. And hence it will become more important, like how do we handle, like once we transition to EV economy and used EV starts coming in, then how do we handle that growth and keep them ready? If you look into how EVs are growing across the world, so again, looking into cars, almost some 13.7 million EVs get newly registered in 2023. And within that, if you will see that of this entire share, LMIC has close to just 1%, less than 1% contribution of the new EV car sales, right? So that's a smaller contribution coming from LMICs. And hence the idea is like, how do we kind of drive better transitions for them? And if you also see like of the EV sales, 70% is contributed by pure electrics and 30% is the plug-in hybrids. It's important to see like how the dynamics play between these two technologies within electric and how the world starts moving more to more pure battery electric vehicles. I think all of us are fairly conversant like what are key challenges for EVs, and this just becomes their intensity becomes higher when it comes to the LMICs, the high cost of the technology, the limited incentives, fiscal incentives, particularly the governments can afford, right? And already there is a high influx of used vehicles into the country, and that compared to already high cost of EVs further makes a proposition difficult for many of the LMICs. Charging hassles, I think this is common story even for bigger countries developing a right kind of a charging infrastructure. I think with LMICs, this becomes further intense gap area. And policy and regulatory supports, I think they are in evaluation stage. UNEP conducted a study looking into vehicle emission standards across LMICs, and only 45 countries have some form of a standard on vehicle emissions, right? Other 100 are yet to catch up. So there are gaps. So between these gaps, what are the opportunity pathways? So one, on the left-hand side, we are looking at used EVs, like how used EVs can become an opportunity to LMICs. If new EV sales are expected to rise to, let's say, some 60 millions in the year 2030, we are looking upon an opportunity where used EV sales kind of become close to 1 million that. So how do we enable this transition rightly? If we look upon the scrappage as an opportunity, right, like with our old ICE fleet, there is end of life in which the vehicle should be kind of disposed. However, because of missing regulations and enforcements, a lot of these vehicles are extending much beyond their safe and performing life. So there's a high scrappage stock that is sitting in most of the LMICs, but not really taking into effect. So I think with going forward, stricter regulations and other parts, we hoping to see reducing new EV influx, but an increasing scrappage. So still on year basis, we are talking of almost 80 million units of ICE that we have to kind of deal with, and retrofit hence becomes a very, very interesting opportunity for this vehicle segment. I would like to now start going into little more details on each of the two parts, the used EVs as well as the retrofits. I talked about this scenario, right? Like the world is seeing some 3.1 million used vehicles which are getting exported. These vehicles are primarily coming from four developed economies, higher portion from European Union, followed by Japan, USA, and smaller share by South Korea. And out of this share, only 3% uh, is EVs, right? So that's a small number, close to some 98,000 vehicles of used EVs. Yeah. And now if I look into like this 3.1 million total vehicles, out of which 2.99 millions are ICE, you see it as a small hybrids part of it as well. So these are used ICE that are getting exported out of this four economy, with again highest share of European Union, followed by Japan. And the interesting part is that to whom country they are exporting, 80% of them are LMIC countries. Yeah, so we have some names of these countries as well where these exports are fairly prominent. And let's look into what it becomes of the used EVs. It's already an existing market, right? So almost some 98,000 of EVs we estimate are getting exported again from the same four economies. But in this case, US is predominant economy, which is exporting used EVs. And again, the LMIC shares of this used EVs is high. It is 72%, right? And again, like if you look into between BEV and PHEV, we are seeing that it's PHEV which is forming a higher share of the used old EVs that are getting exported or traded. Yeah. So these are again the trends which we need to see and figure it out, like how do we strengthen this right trend for safe imports into the LMIC countries and create a good transition. So again, this is a little repetition and detailed assumptions. Our report will be shared after the completion of this webinar. So we do request to go into the detailed things and share your feedback with us. Again, just listing down that with all the different assumptions of growth of EVs by 2030, we estimate that used EVs share by 2030 on annual basis can be of the order of 0.8 to 1 million. So that is the quantum that we are looking will start getting traded. The report details 5 case studies brought from different countries, covering different regions, to understand like how between LMICs, some of them have already started playing a facilitating role for used EVs import. So let's start with Mauritius. They did interesting thing. They removed the excise duty on used EV. They kept that excise duty on the hybrid vehicle. So even when you purchase a used hybrid, you will see that its cost of acquisition is higher than a used ICE vehicle, right? But because you have reduced the subsidy or it is exempted on the used EV, it is higher than ICE, but still lower than the hybrid. And when you convert this into a TCO, total cost of ownership proposition, then used EV starts making better economic sense. So the country with allowing this favorable tax structure for used EV and also adding up a restriction of not allowing vehicles older than 4 years, both for ICE and EVs. So this two things has really helped the country to kind of gain momentum and bring more used EVs. So there's a high penetration of EVs in the country. So that is Mauritius. If you look into Cambodia, it brings another part into the picture. Here we have just brought out like how if your used EVs, you increase the vehicle life, then the cost of that vehicle goes down, right? So this is just a Tesla, and 5 years Tesla is costing lower than a 2 years old Tesla, right? So that is common sense, that is expected. Similarly for a different model. But what is interesting is the trade-off that it starts playing when you start bringing a used EV, more old EV into a country, and if it is quickly requiring a battery replacement, then our estimations are showing that cost of the battery replacement that reduces the parity of the TCO versus the new BEV that can be provided. So hence it becomes very interesting, like what Mauritius did to really kind of control the right age of the used EV to enter into the country, so that right economic value of that vehicle will remain with its citizen for a longer time. So that's what Cambodia has to be more watchful. Now, if you look Mongolia, Mongolia did exempted excise duty, but it exempted on both hybrids as well as the used BEVs. Right. So again, it is a little different case of Mauritius. They exempted used EVs, but they also actually exempted hybrids also. And there is no age bar of how old hybrids you can bring. So what we are seeing that in the country, there is a high penetration of greater than 10 years hybrid, right? And that too without custom duties, its proposition over the battery electric vehicle is then lower. So the country is seeing more influx of old hybrids over the used BEVs. So again, this is a contrasting example that we wanted to bring the importance, like what kind of right regulations and policies will play important if we want to support the case of used EVs. Kenya, I'm glad we have Mr. John Mark Bolo from Kenya Bureau of Standards, and in further discussions he will detail it later. But they are one of the leaders in Africa who did very interesting thing, right? So first they put up a minimum benchmark on state of health of used EVs. So they said 80%. Anything below 80% not allowed as used EVs. Plus, they also put up an age limit on the used vehicles, not older than 8 years. Yeah. So these two things combined has made Kenya seen rising used EVs penetrating into the country. Yeah. So I think we will be very keen, Mr. John, going forward to understand Kenya's experience and what we can learn. We brought Ukraine intentionally. The country currently is in conflicts, but what has interestingly happened is like constrained by their oil supply chains, there is a high penetration of used EVs in the country, and used EVs are much higher penetrated over the new EVs, and the country has developed a very good network of mechanics to really handle these used EVs and their life cycle maintenance forward. So I think the case study actually brings the importance that in addition to the taxation, we also need to work upon our internal manpower and supply chain, the service part of the supply chain to really handle used EVs well, which Ukraine is handling well. So between this combination of case studies, we were able to see like what are some of the gaps and what are, and basis to those gaps, we have detailed out the recommendations for increasing used EVs penetration. Some of the significant recommendations is like we are saying like the country should start adopting minimum battery state of health. There should be a clear age for importing of used EVs into the country. Country should have some right standards for monitoring of state of health. Under refurbishment, the country should start developing right manpower to really able to refurbish and handling them well with right trainings. There has to be right incorporation of used EVs in the registration system, their classifications, the handling of incentives. So that needs to be handled well. And once a vehicle is brought, its right inspection and its periodic roadworthiness testing over and above typically what is done for ICE. And UNES R100 is a good standard to be followed for such inspection protocol of used EVs. And lastly is the disposal part, like how we handle the disposal of batteries and this used end of life in a right form. So these are recommendations. Again, the report highlight this in quite details. Going into the retrofits, can I request everyone to please be in mute? Akshay, can you please mute everyone? Thank you. Thank you. Going on to the second part of the pathway, the retrofit parts. Everyone knows what a retrofit is, but very quick examples. We studied one retrofit company, REM, doing two-wheeler retrofitting in motorcycles in Kigali, Rwanda. And interesting observations, $800 retrofit kit versus a $1,600 new battery, both with battery swapping option. So you don't need to purchase a battery. It is a swap OPEX cost to you. And this $800, which is 50% reduction of a otherwise EV purchase, the payback period is almost less than a year, like 6 to 12 months. Very interesting retrofit example. And already the country is seeing multiple players to kind of starting to do EV swapping as a model, and REM is one of them to do the retrofitting. Similarly, 𝗲-𝗠𝗶𝗏𝗏, again, I'm glad that we have a representative from leadership of 𝗲-𝗠𝗶𝗏𝗏, Dr. Srini, with us today, and he can share in more details. But the idea is very similar, like two-wheeler, like even though it is costlier, new EV, but on TCO, there is already a parity that is existing in the country, right? So question is like, why retrofit? For the class of livelihood, people who have to make that decision of buying a costly vehicle versus using their existing vehicle and getting it retrofitted, the economy and TCO parity works quite beautifully. So India has already started doing a lot of retrofits. I think 𝗲-𝗠𝗶𝗏 is doing more than 100 retrofits. They're also going outside India, and happy to hear their thoughts in the next part. And payback is again less than a year. We are talking of 7 to 9 months payback for it. Now, if you go for a smaller truck, 3.5 tonner truck for a company, Northway Motors, doing this retrofit in India, again, interesting. Here, though the TCO parity does not exist, but with retrofit, it makes a great case of converting into electric. And again, the economy is supporting it, and this segment is also seeing multiple retrofits across. Then there are some niche examples. One company in Tanzania, Emotions, doing safari vehicles for forest retrofits. This company, Autolabor, they have scaled up in Latin with fairly amount of number of conversions in actually four-wheeler cars retrofitting. E-bus retrofit, I think there are a lot of pilots that are happening. There are still examples. One in US, I'm aware, in California, in more developed countries, which is in a fairly commercial phase of retrofitting. Other developing countries, the examples that we have picked up for this case study, I think these are pilot pickups and need more further investigations. So my last slide, like how we can improve our ecosystem of retrofit. So we have looked into across the value chain. How do we improve government policies, allowing retrofits for incentives, allowing right taxation structure for their subcomponents, imports coming into the country, right? Creating right economy of scale, creating right skills and training for manpower thing, allowing right registrations, having right homologation and type approval process of marrying retrofit kit to appropriate models and doing it in scale. And ultimately, the last part would be the usage of it by creating that service networks of doing retrofits, but also maintaining them forwards. So between all these case studies is highlighting these barriers and solutions. So let me stop here and handing it back to Akshay. And good time for us to take more questions on this report before we go on to the panel discussion. Over to you, Akshay.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rahul. So we have few questions coming in from the participants. So I'll just quickly summarize them. So first one is about how to handle the used vehicles that are coming in, wherein the battery life is low and it's translating into batteries being dumped into the developing countries. So just to answer that, I mean, through our case studies also, we have came across regulations by countries. I think Mr. John Mark will be talking more about from the Kenya perspective here. So there are regulations which are avoiding, incoming of the batteries which are having a lower state of health, and also with the EVs which have a higher age to avoid this. So I think we'll be answering more on that. Then the second question is about if this study covers the two-wheelers. So to answer this,
So
two-wheel.
just to answer and add a point to your first mark question, it is also a function of the price that I'm getting a used EV, right? For example, I'm sitting in an LMIC country. Let's say the state of health of the vehicle is at 85%. So it is already fairly used vehicle for maybe 3 years. 85% SOH exists, still way above 80%. So I know that my life that I will get in my country is lower, right? But the price that I'm getting that vehicle is, that information is known, the price is kind of meeting the 85% SOH level, then in still bringing that thing, I think that is okay. So I think it's also a question of the right level of certification and confidence on battery useful life in the country to import. So I think it's a mixed play between policy as well as the economic value, Akshay.
Right. The other question is around the two-wheelers, if the study covers two-wheelers as part of it. So just to answer it, I mean, from the used vehicles perspective, the two-wheelers are not covered. But in the retrofits, again, we have looked into how, the adoption of electric two-wheelers can be improved through retrofits, and also within retrofits, how the charging solution like, battery swapping can play a role. Then I think the other question is around PHEVs. When we are looking in the statistics of used EVs that are being traded globally. So currently PHEVs have a higher share compared to pure battery electric vehicles. So the reason, I mean, what we inferred from the data we have seen is that PHEVs have started coming into market early. The BEVs are just coming in now. Uh, so that is the reason why the PHEVs are currently higher. Also, we have seen a trend where the BEVs are increasing in the used vehicle trade market. So I think it has increased from 17 to 30% within 2 to 3 years of time. So we see an increasing trend here. So I think other questions are around training programs and the education systems, and what kind of skilled workforce is required within the EV ecosystem for both used EVs and the retrofitting.
I think that's a very good question, and it needs a more holistic approach. Uh, pManifold and its subsidiary EV has been involved in developing and delivering some of these programs, but I think it needs a more holistic approach of institutionalizing such programs and doing it at right frequency, more repetitions, not just in the capital city, but other places where penetrations are happening. So I think it requires a little more right focus to do right form of trainings across the right stakeholders at certification levels also, plus also at a degree level to develop the ecosystem.
Okay. So there is one more question around the SOC calculation for the used EVs that are being imported. So the question is there a convenient way to measure the SOC without fully discharging, then recharging the battery?
Yeah, I think like more than SOC, we are more worried when we are talking of state of health as the capacity of the battery. How much capacity is remaining in the battery, and not just the charge discharge of each cycles. And I think that's an important question. And I think somewhere other than logging on to the OBD and making this information available, I think there needs to be a more right level of standard, which will push state of health, SOH, at the dashboard level. So when this vehicle comes at the inspection, there should be right protocol to turn on and be able to inspect this vehicle, or a right kind of a pre-shipment certification. So I think it requires a little more depth of work and right standards, Mr. Henry.
So I think there is one more last question that we can take maybe on the retrofitting of ICE to EV, the current cost being same for the new EV as well as retrofitting of an ICE. So how the cost can be optimized and making economic sense to the market.
Akshay, are you answering this question or?
I'm just thinking maybe we can take this question as a part of
Panel discussions with the panelists?
yes.
Sure, sure. I think that's a good point to also bring our panelists. Thank you, panelists. We have Dr. Srini, full name Dr. Srinivas Venu. He is board member 021, and this is a company based out of India, doing retrofits in three-wheelers, and already exploring some markets outside India as well, including Mauritius. So welcome, Dr. Srini. And then we have Mr. John-Mark Bolo. He's a standards officer at Kenya Bureau of Standards, KBS. Very strong background in standards, already part of technical committee manager, looking into EVs. And because of Kenya, very interesting move on used EVs and setting up right protocols, import protocols and regulations for it. It's great that we have you, Mr. John Mark, to share your insights with us. Maybe I can start my first question with Srini. Srini, if you can help us to think like how three-wheeler market is ready to go more retrofitting in India, like how you see potential of this segment for retrofit, what market size you evaluated for India, as what the report is projecting that this market will grow, right? And India set lot of examples for many of the other LMICs. So that will be important, Srini.
Yeah, firstly, thanks for inviting me onto this panel. So, EV, let me just start like this. We are in exciting times in the clean tech space, and electric vehicle is one of, the important vertical in the automotive segment. And we also, it's a clear mandate, or, we all witness that EV has to really pick up very fast as compared to few years back. I'm just talking currently India specific as of now, so that maybe later on the other side of the grass, the kind of markets what we see, I'll just maybe touch base little bit. But on a very India specific kind of a thing, the entire automotive market domination, if you see, is by two-wheeler and three-wheeler, which contributes close to around 79 to 80% of the total, the market complement what we have on a top line sales point of view year on year. And the balance 20% is again distributed among four-wheelers, and then the other, the multi-axle segments and all. So I think this is the focus area. And even this 20% pie, in that again, if you see the buses pertaining to India, it has Almost like as on date, we see close to around 1.5 million of buses which are already plying with all the state utilities, in fact, and out of which at least 55 to 60% are more than 5 years of age, which are which can be easily seen for a retrofitment. That is one point which I would like to underline. Second thing, two-wheeler, of course, it's a standard market because primarily on a for the public commuting from one from the first mile to a last mile kind of a thing. And these days now you see all even the e-commerce activities which are happening. Even that market has significantly picked up, and also both you can see even the rural side also the two wheelers are used for many applications though, in fact. So that is one such opportunity. The point which I wanted to highlight here is three wheelers, which is again significantly growing year on year, in fact. Okay, so earlier when you have the diesel versions of three wheelers, you have certain number, but due to the logistics which has become more, I would say, dynamic these days, where a lot of innovations are coming up, like you see, there are a lot of digitization which is happening on an app based kind of a thing. So going forward you'll see many innovative concepts coming into this particular space, especially into the logistics space, in fact. So the three wheeler, which has again again a multi-purpose here, in fact, it's not just only for certain segment of usage, but also it is very quick moving into the other segments, into the e-commerce space, and into the loading space. The passenger market is already there, in fact. So the first mile and the last mile connectivity, the metros which are coming up in India. So as the infrastructure development happens in our country year on year, you see that it has a cascading effect. It actually impacts to all the other segments, and very specific picking three wheeler has a very great market space, in fact.
Really, why retrofit in three-wheelers versus purchasing a new electric three-wheeler? So I think that insight and what is the market size that you see for India in three-wheeler retrofitting? I think these two things will be very interesting for the groups to understand.
Exactly. So I'm just trying to tag a value in terms of a market size. In the passenger segment itself, there are more than 15 lakh autos which are already plying on the Indian roads, in fact, or even beyond. On a very conservative note, I'm just saying, the loader has again a figure close to around 7.5 to 8 lakhs of three wheelers which are already on the loader space, which is already plying, in fact. So in this, again, to be very specific, in the passenger auto segment is we have more than 5 years where I see the retrofitment opportunity which is coming up. It is almost like 45 to around 48% are more than 5 years of old, which are ready for retrofitment, in fact. Now, just one point I wanted to add here is, now there is a mandate also which is coming up from the central government that at least 2.5 to 3% needs to come from the retrofitment, is what I want to highlight one thing. And we, as a retrofitment, as one of our business vertical which we have, for us the cost is really coming, as you see the presentation also, that it is less than 50% of the average cost which is there on a new EV, in fact. And additionally, we are giving 5 years of warranty on the retrofitment product. So any vehicle which is 5 years and above, so we have developed some macros and all based on the chassis evaluation criteria and all, and some innovative digitized tools which we use to evaluate the chassis performance, whether it is ready for EV conversion or not. Once we have our own rate which says that this qualifies for a retrofitment, then we take up that particular vehicle, and we just within 4 to 4.5 hours, or maybe less than 5 years, we do the retrofitment, and the vehicle is ready for the usage with an additional 5 years of warranty, in fact. So this is very particular to the three-wheeler space, and we see tremendous market. The volumes are now picking up for us. Our product is already ARA approved, which has a government approval in place, in fact. But we certainly see, as the new EV vehicle, whatever the subsidies are there in terms of the registration process and all, in some states that is also even percolated, at least like a couple of states which I know, at least in Telangana, the state where I am in, very recently the policy has come out. So they're also giving they're also waiving off even for a retrofitment vehicle also. So that is a good sign, in fact. So the sentiment of conversion would really happen much faster, in fact. So that is one thing which I would like to underline. I'll pause here. Maybe I'll wait for your next question, because I
Thank
can
you.
keep talking like that, in fact. So I just want to pause here.
No, I think that is good, Srini. So if I just summarize what you are saying, like of the existing stock that is existing in both passenger as well as loader applications in three-wheelers, you estimate that almost 45 to 48% are very potentially ripe cases of taking it to retrofits. And lot of local ecosystem, like homologations and other things are getting in place, which makes you more confident of this journey. So that I think summarize that it's a bubbling opportunity in India in this segment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why? Because we haven't faced any challenge in homologation. So I think it's a way to really build the product from a technology point of view, and complete all the clauses or the formalities what you have in the homologation. So
Sure.
it's like a very clear, process-oriented exercise to
Sure.
get the product.
That's my second question. I will come to you, Srini, on that. Let me connect and bring John Mark. John Mark, your experience in Kenya to support retrofits. Can you share like how has it been? And many countries see a problem in creating a policy but really enforcing it, right? So the time lag and the quality of enforcement, there are a lot of leakages. So how Kenya uh, policy around retrofits is working, and how are you enforcing it with your stakeholders, right? Which includes the customs, the testing agencies, the importers for this used EVs. So what has been Kenya's experience, John Mark?
Good afternoon, all. Thank you for inviting me to this particular panel discussion. I think it's one enriching one. You are breaking when you are actually making a question, but I think what I've captured is you want me to give you a view of Kenya's experience in issues with regard to retrofits. Actually, just as you've just put
Basically,
it in your report.
Used EVs first, John Mark. Like in used EVs, Kenya made this regulation of 80% SOC and limiting the age of the vehicles getting imported. So combination of these two things, how it has helped Kenya, and how are you ensuring that it is getting enforced? How do you measure state of health on the batteries that are available to you?
Oh, thank you. Let me first start by saying that Kenyan government released a Gazette notice, that is the legal notice number 78 of 2020, which directed that all vehicles import, and when I talk about all, meaning both the IC and the EVs, in most cases the EVs are the used EVs, that they must conform with the requirements of the Kenyan standard, that is the KS 1515. So the first condition is that the vehicles must not be more than 8 years old from the year of manufacture. That is the first condition. The other condition is that the state of health of the batteries of the used EVs must not be less than 80%. Now, actually, that is one area of interest that I also wanted to float a question to the panel. But now, because it has been directed to me, I need also to say that what is happening is that when it comes to inspection, bit of it on the state of health of the battery, actually currently what is being done is that we're using the battery management system, the BMS data. And then upon doing the inspections, and of course, it's not only the battery health that is being checked, there are also other things that are being checked in that standard, the KS 1515. And normally they are issued with what we call a certificate of roadworthiness. We call it COR. So they are issued with COR. So when they arrive at the port, when these vehicles arrive at the port, and normally they must be accompanied by the COR. It's also very important to note that Kenya, that is Kenya Bureau of Standards, has actually contracted what we call the QISJ, the Quality Inspection Services of Japan, based in 5 different countries. One of them is Singapore, we have the UK, we have Japan, which does the inspection and issues the COR. And upon all those conditions that we've actually talked about, they are accepted normally at our ports or at our intake point. It's also very important actually to say that these particular requirements in this particular standard, the KS 1515, which is on code of practice for inspection of these EVs, it has actually impacted positively in terms of the lifespan of the batteries and the lifespan of the vehicle, because when you talk about EVs, the most important thing is actually the batteries. So we've actually protected consumers. We've protected the consumers, because if you look at the cost of an EV, the major cost of the whole thing is actually on the batteries. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. John Mark. I think do you have a question? Like, I think using this certification, third-party certification agency at 5 points of import, I think that's a good idea. And does this regulation apply only to used cars, used EV cars, or it applies to all segments of EVs, be it electric two-wheeler, three-wheeler, also buses or trucks, or is it only for cars at the moment?
For all vehicles, whether it is two-wheeler, for EV, whether it is two-wheeler, it is three-wheeler, exactly.
Got it. And your third-party agency appointed is able to do such inspections, pre-shipment inspections across all vehicle segments, right? And across all different models and makes, not necessarily to only kind of Japanese model or some other model, but they are able to handle Chinese model and all other different country models as well. Is that right?
Exactly. It doesn't matter which the origin of the vehicle.
Okay.
Okay,
I think that's already a very good success case study. And do you see that this experience of Kenya, because most of the African countries are very high on used ICE vehicle import, and sooner or later they will also start adopting used EVs like Kenya. Do you think your set best practices in terms of this regulations, in terms of this appointing a third party and measurements and inspections, do you think this can be replicated across other African countries fair easily, or you see that there are some elements which needs areas of improvement?
Thank you. What is actually happening, you must also understand that Kenya being an East African country, Kenya becomes and is actually the major entry point to East Africa region. Now, what is actually happening, I'm very much hopeful that Kenya has an opportunity of even influencing other countries, that is Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, all those countries in the East African region, because what happens is that currently we are having what you call harmonization of regional standards. So with that kind of effort, it means that other countries will actually see the need to have one common standard that actually that standardizes different aspects. And in this particular case, that is the EVs or the used EVs. So we are going to, with the harmonization effort being placed in the government, there are very high opportunities that this one will also open to adopt EVs and even the used EVs for that matter.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you think like some level of standardization driven globally on different EV OEMs to have some standard and very easily accessible information on state of health with a higher confidence will be useful to further grow this market going forward, right? So that other than inspection agency, if your customs team or inspection team wants to do a very quick audit of the same state of health, they are easily able to do. So those kind of standards and support from OEMs, do you agree that it will go a long way in terms of evolving a strong used EV market?
Definitely, I agree with you.
Great, great, great. I think thank you very much, John Mark. Coming back to my one last question, and which I'm also seeing as a question from some of the audiences. It's posed onto the report, but I think I will possibly try to get answer from Srini's. Srini, what are mechanisms that you believe will make retrofits a fairly scalable model? Right? On the regulation side, maybe also on the supply chain side of sourcing quality equipments at low cost, maybe right some localization extents. What are those 2 or 3 top measures very quickly? We are already fairly close to the end mark. So wanted your kind of important summary thoughts which will really make difference. And you can choose to talk only of India, Srini, or India and outside as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just make it in 3 points. Very simple. I'll keep it very simple. First thing is, the right technology in terms of the powertrain configuration, which is very important. So if we really get the right configuration or the form factor for a particular model per se, if the technology and the integration is done in a proper way, this is a very great opportunity to be in this particular space because the market is available. So that is one thing. And 021, we the 2 retrofit lines what we have already established, we have done utmost care in terms of the technology, and now we are trying to further upgrade it with the latest the so-called artificial intelligence and all those things also we are building around it. So the technology plays a very important role from a a regulation perspective. Today the policy or the regulatory framework needs to be worked upon in a better way, because central do have the basic structure in place in terms of energy as a service or maybe a retrofitment or for an EV. But how this actually gets percolated at the federal level is very, very important at the different state provinces. So I think that is one area. Still some work has to be done, and we are certainly working very close with some of the associations like CI and a couple of other platforms, and maybe even your platform also. We should certainly address this particular issue, because for us the central can have the basic structure policy in place, but end of the day at a very particular and at an individual state level, they have their own criterias, how the energy is really utilized and what this technology, what kind of certification. So the kind of other conditions which which prevail there. So all the many factors are really taken into consideration in getting a minimum regulation formatted into the particular thing. That is one gap still what we feel, so that needs to be addressed in fact. The third thing is, see, already the cost economics, if you have the right technology, from a cost economics point of view, whether you take an overall TCO or you can do any comparisons you want, that the right product plays a very important role, because the other implementation or the execution cost, which is also very important, because we spent almost a few months in training a team to actually do this conversion. So that is like a very crucial and a skilled job. So one has to really spend a lot of days or hours dedicated into this training, getting the people understand how this retrofitment process really happened, because it is already a built vehicle and we are just trying to put a new item into it and start integrating into the whole into the other parameters, in fact. So these three are very, very important for us. Yes, we are in the very positive journey, I can say, from a 021 point of view.
Thank you, Srini. And maybe I will just bring Anika. I know like one of her very important area of work which UNEP is also contributing is end of life of batteries. Anika, if we can have you back. And John Mark, if you can help us also to see through, like, because if you're bringing more used EVs in the country where some part of the battery life is already used in other world, then your battery accumulation will start happening faster. So has Kenya already started working on its end of life policies, regulations, investments, and mechanisms in place for handling end of life of batteries, EV batteries?
Uh, yes, thank you. Now, Kenya, though this is more of a regulation issue, and I'm seeing the network is breaking. Am I audible?
It is breaking,
It is breaking, yeah.
John. Do you have a good, maybe you can turn off your video if that will help. Let's see, like maybe then you can complete your statement.
Okay, what I'm saying is that Kenya through body known as NEMA, which is actually National Environmental Management Authority, that is the government entity that is concerned with matters of environmental conservation, has a regulation known as the Extended Producer Responsibility Regulation. We call it the EPR. And in EPR, one of the major concerns, or one of the major things that are well elaborated on the EPR regulation, is the issues of circularity. So this particular regulation puts a responsibility to the importers, the manufacturers, to ensure that they follow up on the products, and the products, maybe a byproduct of any item they deal with that might have an impact on the environment. So, for example, in the case of batteries, you must actually take responsibilities at the time when the batteries have reached the end of life. Then you must either repurpose it if it's not repurposing, or maybe using for a different purpose, or making an overall change so that you use it for production of something else. So there is that element of a responsibility that is actually kept on each and every importer of a battery or of an EV.
Sure. Thank you. I
Thank
think
you.
that extended producer responsibility EPR that you mentioned, John Mark, I think it is evolving as a good set of policy to drive it. However, its enforcement between different stakeholders, how to really make it happen, at what right economic value between players to motivate. I think those are some more nuts and bolts that needs to be tightened to really operationalize that EPR mechanism rightly. So I definitely share my good wishes to Kenya for implementing EPR strongly in years forward. With that, I hand over to Akshay for closing remarks. But thank you everyone for this wonderful discussion, questions. Lot of your pointers really validate what we are undertaken in this study. I also request Akshay to release the link of this full study. And as pManifold, as UNEP, supported by Climate Work Foundation, I think we will very highly appreciate any feedback, any questions, because I think this is a first global effort to really capture this right case studies and data across this 136 plus kind of LMICs. And there will be definitely next steps to follow. Over to you, Akshay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rahul, and also our panelist, Mr. John Mark and Dr. Srini. So it was very interesting discussion that we have. Although we have exceeded our limit by 5 minutes, I think the discussion was interesting, and I think participants were able to understand a few things in much more detail. So in the chat box, we have the link for the report for everyone's consumption. So you can go through the report, and any questions or suggestions can be passed on to us through the contact details mentioned. So yeah, so that is it from our end on the webinar side. And thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much, all the panelists and participants.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Very nice discussions, and look forward to staying connected through this report and your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good time.